Hello everyone. I had every intention of doing another random creature design for this next video, but you know how it is, inspiration strikes at weird times. So I found this post while I was at work, scrolling through Facebook, as one does at work, and this is basically a bunch of bad pet panoramas. And I was scrolling through this and I was like, a lot of these look like they can make some really cool mythical type creatures. So that's what we're doing today. I picked out a few. Well, first of all, this is the post here. It's by Rude Ranch Animal Rescue, and I'll have this linked in the description. I don't know if everybody will be able to see it, but it'll be there in case you want to look. Yeah, so I picked a few of these already. So this is one of them, this borzoi here, this long boy. Let you see that. And let's see. I picked this one, this ear doggo, and also this cat. So yeah, definitely, like, there's two whole posts of these things, so I definitely want to do more of these. For now, I just picked 3, but yeah, let's get this thing started. Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts about each of these critters and the process of creating them, so apologies if my ramble about one creature runs into footage of the next creature, just bear with me, okay? I was very fortunate this time around in that once I saw these pictures, I pretty much instantly knew what I wanted to make out of them. That rarely happens, so I was really eager to ride this wave and jump into Procreate to start laying down my ideas. I was most excited to tackle the borzoi image, and I had this idea of making this ethereal / surreal dragon. A lot of the comments on the image said it gave luck dragon vibes, and I thought the same thing, but I wanted to do something a little more fierce and weird than Falcor. Cute as Falcor may be, I just wanted to get away from that first impression and do something more up my alley. Since the original image made the dog look like it had multiple limbs that were detached, I wanted to create that look in the dragon. I thought it looked really neat and reminded me of those weird, surreal depictions of angelic beings you see floating around every now and then. When it came to the cat image, there wasn't anything odd about the cat except for the really long tail, but for some reason I got this pressing urge to turn it into some sort of ghoul cat. I've been playing a fair bit of Elden Ring lately, like many of us have, so I think some of the inspiration for all 3 of these creatures came from there just a little bit, especially as far as my choices to go with designs for all of them that were more on the monstrous side than the cute side. For the many-eared dog, my first instinct was, weirdly, to throw in some wildebeest influence in there. I don't know why. It might have to do with the fact that I chose to give it a nice thick neck and heavy shoulders like a wildebeest, and then the rest of the anatomy just followed suit. But yeah, I have no idea. It just felt right. I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to structure the head aside from the ears. I wanted those to be the main feature of the head and just go full-on weird with this one. I didn't want to include a snout or anything, and I feel like that decision helped with my end goal of making this into a more mythical animal rather than a functioning creature. Mythical animals don't have to make anatomical sense, and this one sure does not. I ended up just covering the bottom of the head where the mouth would be with fur because for the life of me, I just couldn't figure out what else to do with it. So whatever structure is under that fur is up to y'all's imaginations. You might have noticed in the Procreate footage that I spent a lot more time on the lines for the dragon than on the other creatures. This is because I actually lined and colored the dragon first, even though the cat and the ear dog are the first things you're going to see colored. The dragon was the one I did the most details on overall, so it just felt right to save that for the grand finale of this video. But yeah, doing the line work for the dragon reminded me just how much I hate doing lines. Like many artists, I struggle with the line work version of a drawing just not giving the same vibe as the sketch version. I'm also super impatient with my pieces, and I just wanted to get to my finished vision as soon as possible, so line work ends up feeling painfully tedious to me, and I just can't stand it. Unless I'm doing something like a really simple piece, but that's another story. So that being said, when it came to the other 2 creatures, I did my darndest to keep them simple and fast. I wanted to try a little experiment where I lowered the opacity of the lines a bunch for when I printed them out onto my marker paper. Having such light lines allowed me to go over them with colored pencil later on and give them a much more cohesive look rather than having these stark black or brown lines like I usually do. I really love how that aspect of these first two pieces turned out. It also gave me a chance to go in and make little adjustments or additions to the lines without it looking unnatural. As you'll see later, I printed out the dragon's lines at full opacity but colored them pink first, which gave a similar effect, but it wasn't as pleasing to me as the really low opacity lines. I also want to give a mention to my absolute favorite sketching and lining brush in Procreate, which is the dry ink brush. I'm fairly certain it's one of the default brushes, and if you like a more traditional look to your digital art, I highly recommend this brush. I've tried all kinds of brushes in Procreate for lining, and this one gives just the right amount of pen pressure and has an amazing traditional media-esque texture. So yeah, give it a try if you haven't already, it's amazing! As far as the design for the cat, I wanted to keep it fairly basic but also otherworldly. Part of me wanted to make the entire cat fluffy and elegant and fairy-like, but the goblin in me said no, we're going the ghoul route. I tried to find a good balance between the fluffy bits and the hairless parts of the body, and I'm pretty satisfied with how it turned out. I feel like the weight of the design is evenly distributed, and while I was a little sad to not get to draw fluff over the whole thing, drawing the skin folds was actually quite fun. While the overall design and color scheme was simple, this creature was an absolute joy to create, and I love the look of the colored pencil over the marker. Those two media complement each other so well, and the colored pencil allowed me to get in there and do some of the fine details that not even the teeny tiny nib on some of my markers could accomplish. I think the cat would make a fantastic tomb guardian or something to that effect. Let me know what you think about what exactly this creature is and what its function is. I'd love to hear any story ideas y'all have for any of these three critters actually, because I don't have many ideas about that myself. As you can see, I left the ear dog lines a lot more finished than the cat or the dragon. I wouldn't even call this line art actually, it's essentially just a slightly cleaned up sketch. I did this as part of the experiment as well because I wanted to see if I could make a finished traditional piece without fully hashed out lines to work with. I don't think I'd do this with a piece I didn't have a clear vision for, but for this particular creature I knew exactly what I wanted, so I felt pretty comfortable going into this without clear lines. To be honest, part of the reason I did this was because I was just super over doing line work, and I felt like if I attempted to line this, I would lose some of the energy in the sketch, and I really love the sketch. The sketch I printed out was just dark enough that I could make it out underneath the marker, so I'm glad I chose to go with a lighter base color for this critter or I would have been hosed. And speaking of colors, I actually did some color roughs for these guys, which is something that I don't normally do, and I'm so grateful my little pea brain actually thought to do it this time. I did those color roughs in Photoshop, and they helped take away some of the stress I normally feel about picking a color scheme on the fly like I usually do. I tend to get a little overwhelmed by color choices, especially when I'm having to pick colors on the camera, but figuring out what I wanted before I even sat down to film meant that I was able to pick just a few markers to work with and have a more relaxing art process. I wanted to give a little nod to the original image by giving this guy German Shepherd-like coloration. The combo of black and gray brown I chose for some reason brought back traumatic memories of playing Prince of Persia Warrior Within as a teenager. Shout out to everyone else who almost had a panic attack every time the freaking Dahaka started chasing you. Because of that, I felt the need to add in some red to this character as well, which I did in the form of some random paint marker strokes. If you are familiar with that game, you know that red is pretty much the only bright color in that anxiety-inducing hellscape. I ended up using the colored pencils a lot more in this piece than in the other two, as it did start out so rough and needed so much tightening up, but I'm really pleased with the result. I feel like keeping the line so rough helped me keep the original look I was going for. There's something about those long, gangly legs that just look so bouncy and pleasing to me, and I love how they contrast with the sturdy upper body of this critter. I don't know much about the backstory of these creatures, but I do think they all exist in the same universe, so I wanted to have a little something to tie them all together. For that, I just went with something simple, which was to add some kind of gold effect to each of them. While I think the cat is more the guardian type, I think this ear dog is something of a warrior in spite of not really having any weaponry that we know of, at least. Maybe there's some teeth in there somewhere, I don't know. From doing this piece, I also learned that not only can you layer pencil over alcohol marker, but you can also use alcohol marker over colored pencil. I did this to add a little more shading to this critter, and it worked out just fine. I was apprehensive at first that the pencil would get all over my marker nib and mess it up, but it didn't stick to my marker like I thought it would. I wouldn't use this technique extensively for that reason, just in case it did start to stick to my markers, but for just some quick shading, it was fine. Overall, I'm really happy with how this weird little guy turned out, and he's everything I envisioned when I first set out to get this idea down. Okay, now we're on to the last creature. Well, last creature for you, but first for me. This one definitely took me the longest just because I chose to work so big with this one. Like I said, I did the most detail as far as line work with this dragon, and I felt like it would do it a disservice to only have a half page for him like I had already planned on doing with the other critters. When I started working on this, it had been a really long time since I used my markers for a serious piece, or at all really. I actually can't even remember when the last time was I used my markers before this. I think it was sometime before my husband and I moved, so wow, it's been a while. I went at this with no warm-up or refresher or anything, so I was just a little bit nervous about it, but I'm pleased with how it turned out. Once I got started, all my old techniques came rushing back, and it was pretty easy to get back into the flow of using markers. The flesh was, hands down, no pun intended, the most fun thing to do for me. I figured out a technique for flesh tones a while back that I still love to use. The blender marker that comes with just about every sizable marker set is paramount to this technique. I think a lot of the assumption with blender markers is that you put the colorful markers down first and then you use the blender afterward, but I personally think you should do the opposite. Using the blender marker in the first manner I described has always had bad results for me, in that the markers never seem to have a smooth transition. It always leaves the edges of the markers looking all blocky and super noticeable. I found by putting the blender marker down first and using the colors on top of it, it allows them to bleed together and blend in a far more soft way, kind of similar to watercolors, but not as drastic. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than using the colors first. For skin especially, this works like a charm. It was a little tedious doing all the hands I guess I was having to rotate between 3 or 4 markers, so yeah, including the blender, but once I got into the groove, it was really relaxing to do, and I enjoyed getting into the zone and just kind of spacing out as I rendered all 5 million of his little rat hands. Speaking of the hands, I will be the first to admit that I did regret my initial idea of giving him all those limbs. The idea was really cool in my head, but when I actually set out to draw all the hands, it was like my entire being just let out this long, drawn-out death rattle. But I pushed through, and I'm really proud of myself for tackling this. I do not like drawing hands one bit, but I knew the end result was going to be so cool, and I just love it. Honestly, it helped that this dude is not human at all, so I didn't have the pressure of trying to make his hands perfect. Since it's a fantasy creature, I didn't care that all of his hands weren't carbon copies of each other as far as anatomy, at least to me. They're a little mismatched, and that's okay. It's still on par with my ultimate vision for this creature. I didn't even bother to hold myself to a standard of perfection when I was drawing him because I knew it was just going to discourage me. That's something I've had a lot of trouble letting go of in the past, and I'm happy I'm finally working past that barrier and creating art I love that's a little kooky instead of quote-unquote safe art that's more anatomically sound but also stiff and lifeless. Doing these pieces was something a lot different than the looser, simpler drawings I've been doing lately for ARPG art like I mentioned a couple videos ago. I know I said I want to continue to pursue a more loose and gestural style, but that didn't work out well for these pieces, and I'm okay with that. The more art I do, the more I realize that whatever style I'm working in at that time is just a reflection of what's going on in my life and what kind of media I'm consuming. If I'm watching a lot of cute shows and playing cute games and looking at artists with a cute style, that's what I'm most inspired to draw. And that's when I usually draw the more lighthearted and simple things. In this case, like I said, I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring and also eating up a crap ton of horror media, so my style for sure defaulted back to what I refer to as my natural style, which is more fleshed out and semi-realistic. I think it worked out really well for bringing these particular characters to life the way I pictured them in my head. I could not have drawn them true to my vision if I'd tried to force myself to do this in any other style. Social media loves to pressure artists into picking one style or color scheme or subject that they feel obligated to draw in over and over. And at one time I felt the need to do the same thing, but recently I've become more relaxed about finding joy in my art and drawing whatever I want, however I feel like at the time. If I want to draw something cute and cartoony, I will do it. If I want to draw a semi-realistic hellbeast, then I'm going to do that too, because ultimately, if I don't like my art, then it's going to show through in the finished products, and no one truly wants that. These past few years of learning to enjoy my art have been quite the journey, and I still have a long way to go, but I feel like I'm getting more entrenched in that positive feedback loop and consistently creating things that I like. It's a really good feeling. If you know, you know, and if you're not there yet, keep on trucking. I promise you it gets better. Anyhow, this turned out to be a great exercise for not only creature design, but also in technique and learning that I can find inspiration in unconventional things. You don't need a perfect, majestic reference image as a jumping off point. You can create something cool from a distorted, derpy picture of a dog trying to grab a toy. Like I said, I for sure want to do more of these, and I can't wait to see what weird creatures spring up out of the next batch. So, with that being said, I think I'll leave you all here, so I hope you all enjoyed watching these creatures come to life as much as I enjoyed creating them. And thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.